Okay, let me paint you a picture. I wake up at 6:45 a.m. I immediately check my phone because I hate myself. The first notification is the New York Times morning briefing. I usually just wipe it away though, because I don't remember signing up for it. Checking my emails is next. There might be one or two from a brand or client I didn't get to the day before, but the Dealbook newsletter is always at the top, first thing at 6 a.m. I think I have to read it to be informed. After that, I get up, get dressed, and go for a walk. I put in my AirPods and catch up on some podcasts, usually something like the Ezra Klein Show or Hard Fork. While I'm on my walk, I usually get a breaking news alert about something I feel like I'm supposed to care about, but really don't. I usually just swipe it away. Once I'm done with my walk, I'll eat breakfast and play a calm and collected game of Connections or Wordle, and wait a minute, I've been awake for an hour, and I've spent pretty much all of it with some form of the New York Times. I don't know, maybe it's just a coincidence. What's next on the list? Right. I have to read the news. When did this happen? The New York Times is not a company I feel very strongly about, and to be honest, I can't pin down exactly when I decided to give them this much access to my time, to my life. Was it when I signed up for a free news subscription through my college that hasn't been canceled yet, by the way? Or was it when the Ezra Klein Show locked some episodes behind a paywall, unless I got the New York Times audio add-on? Or was it when the mini crossword went behind a paywall and I got the New York Times games subscription? Man, these guys are really good. And to be honest, I don't know anything about them. Who owns the New York Times? Where do they come from? How do they make their money? Puzzles, cooking, podcasts? What even is the New York Times? I'm asking this because I made a conscious effort earlier this year to delete social media from my phone. That means no more TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. I know. What I'm wondering now though is if I've just replaced it with all this stuff from the New York Times. Or maybe this is just what being 24 is. Let's figure it out. Now, a big reason I want to understand this company is because I think we all have an inherent distrust of news corporations these days. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, the Wall Street Journal is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also owns Fox News, and a couple years ago the Los Angeles Times was bought by Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, a billionaire who got into some controversy last year for not letting the paper's editorial board endorse Kamala Harris for president. Now, most of these papers are not and have not been profitable for quite a while, which brings into question the motives of the billionaires that own them. And these are just the notable national papers, by the way. The legacy cable networks have their own corporate-controlled nightmare, as I'm sure you probably know. So what about the New York Times? Who owns them and how do they make their money? The simple answer is they're a publicly traded company, but the more complicated answer starts with the Ochs-Sulzberger family. Now, this family has controlled the paper for over a century. Now, even with the stock being public today, they came up with a structure that gives them a huge amount of control over the board. Details are fuzzy, but from what I could find, there appears to be about 8 members or so of the family that control the trust, and thus the New York Times. The argument for keeping so much control in the family is that it prevents the company from being taken over in a hostile corporate takeover. Now, this is where a much larger company buys enough shares on the public market to effectively take control of the paper, and it also keeps the paper from having to maximize short-term profits, which means they can better plan for the future, which, as we've seen, has been very important in the last decade. So who are the Ochs-Sulzbergers? I think it's best to look at A.G. Sulzberger, the current chairman of the New York Times. Ever since taking over in 2018, he's made clear his aspiration to make the paper as unbiased as possible, saying recently, quote, "Too often journalists are demonstrating that they're on the side of the righteous, and I really think that can create blind spots and echo chambers." He's pointed out that the Times got big stories wrong, like when it confidently reported that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction ahead of the US-led invasion of Iraq. In case you're not caught up on that, he didn't. As well as when the paper largely dismissed the suggestion that the COVID-19 virus might not have leaked from a lab. YouTube, please don't demonetize me for that. Despite these efforts, the paper seems to have a reputation as being quite left-leaning. Not that this is the end-all be-all arbiter of bias, but the company All Sides gives it a left-leaning bias. Now, this is in reference to the editorial part of the paper, by the way, as it's the part of the paper that claims to present stories and information to their audience as clearly and unbiased as possible. The opinion section of the paper has a much stronger association with the left, with several writers that make their opinions quite known, as is their job. We'll dive more into this later. So we know who runs it, but how do they make money? Is it profitable like the Wall Street Journal or bleeding cash like the Washington Post? Drum roll. They are profitable. Despite their advertising and print newspaper revenue consistently shrinking over the last 15 years, their digital subscription has been insanely successful. What does this digital subscription consist of? Well, you could just get the news like 4 million people do, or like most subscribers, you can bundle it with some of their other popular offerings. New York Audio for podcasts with over 4 million daily downloads, New York Times Cooking with 1 million subscribers and a very successful YouTube following, Wirecutter, The Athletic, and of course, the favorite child, the game subscription, with over 10 million weekly players. Now, as far as I can find, the Times doesn't publish the split of each of these individual offerings by subscription, but based on the numbers published on the global time spent on each of these apps, news and games takes the cake by a long shot, with games recently taking the lead. Now, a sizable portion of the company's income comes from the news division, but it's crazy to think that, as opposed to their competitors that are being funded by the owners of Amazon and Fox News, that the New York Times makes its money from Wordle and the crossword puzzle, which are mostly played on phones, by the way. Wait, is the New York Times a mobile game company? Anyways, we know where the company is today, but how did they get here? It's history time. I know, I'll go quick, but I think there's some real interesting stuff in here that'll help us understand the paper a little bit better. Okay, it says here before I continue to the next section that this is where I put an ad. I don't have an ad. Just like and subscribe if you haven't yet. Thanks. Now, the Times has been around for a long time, a very long time. The paper started under a different name in 1851, but really caught steam by the end of the century, when Adolph Oakes bought the paper and started his family's lineage of ownership. The paper was known to have some conservative leanings through the first half of the 20th century. They distanced themselves from many notable lynching stories and sparsely reported on the treatment of Jews in Germany leading up and during World War II. Now, in 1960, during the Civil Rights Movement, the Time published a full-page ad paid for by activists supporting Martin Luther King Jr. It was titled "Heed Their Rising Voices," criticizing the actions of law enforcement in Montgomery, Alabama, but it contained factual inaccuracies. A Montgomery public safety commissioner sued them for libel, arguing the ad defamed him. In 1964, the Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling in New York Times v. Sullivan, extending First Amendment protections to the publication of all statements, even false ones, on the conduct of public officials. Then in 1971, the Times leaked the Pentagon Papers. It was a series of classified military documents showing that successive presidential administrations had misled the American public and Congress about the true nature and scope of the Vietnam War. Misled is putting it lightly, by the way. This led to another Supreme Court case that again furthered First Amendment protections for the press and shed new light on the insanity of the Vietnam War. So going into the new century, the paper had garnered a pretty decent reputation as one of, if not the, paper of record for the country. Surely it'll stay that way, right? Now, the internet was a cataclysmic change for the Times, as I'm sure you already know, but it really wasn't the only thing weighing newspapers down by the 2010s. nytimes.com launched in 1996, hosting their articles on the site for free through an ad-based model. Back then, they tried to launch a subscription plan in 2005 called Times Select, which failed spectacularly, only attracting like 200,000 members at its peak, which caused it to shut down in 2007. And the following year was the financial crisis. Okay, quick side note. I think it's kind of annoying that pretty much every YouTube video talking about a company's history has to have a section about 2008. Like, obviously it's one of the biggest financial events in the century, but constantly having to hear Bright Sun Films have to say then everything changed in 2008 gets, a bit old, Anyways, everything changed in 2008. The company was pinched for cash as their stock dropped like everyone else's did, but the bigger hit was the collapse of advertising revenue. As the economy entered a recession, the first thing companies did was cut back on advertising. It was expensive for the companies and people weren't buying anything anyways. I feel like this goes a little under the radar when people talk about the decline of print media and journalism. Like, sure, the internet was disrupting the old model, cutting newspaper sales and all that, but the collapse of ad revenue kept these companies from making money publishing online. So in 2011, the New York Times again tried their hands at an online subscription model. They slowly started locking their articles behind a paywall, which was very controversial at the time, but as you know, it worked. As ad and print revenue dropped, the digital subscriptions picked up the slack and more. This allowed the Times to put money back into the paper by the end of the 2010s. They brought on huge names into the space like Kara Swisher, Casey Newton, and even brought Ezra Klein over from Vox, a company he recently founded. But what was their reasoning behind these talent acquisitions? And what has the rise of these named personalities done to the culture of the Times? So, since the business model has changed for the Times so drastically in the last decade, it's worth asking if the product has changed as well. The Times has a storied history of trying and then often failing to be as unbiased as possible presenting the news. As it enters the 2020s, it seems to me like their bet on strong personalities bringing their fan bases to the paper goes against that directive, no matter who the chairman says he wants. To compete in the media ecosystem of today, you need strong voices. Ezra Klein, for instance, made a name for himself through the 2010s by founding Vox, writing his book, and building a loyal fan base through his podcasts that he eventually brought to the Times. He's more popular than ever these days, and the Time has benefited with new subscribers to the news section for his op-eds, and the New York Times audio section to listen to his podcast. Similarly, Andrew Ross Sorkin is one of the leading business journalists in the world. His interviews garner millions of views on YouTube, and his newsletter has grown a huge following. Since the newsletter is distributed through the Times, they again profit. I could go on and on, but just one more example for now. One of the most popular podcasts in the country right now is The Daily, hosted by Michael Barbaro. His curation of topics and unique interview style have again cultivated a loyal fan base, which the Time once again benefits from, as long as they all stay with the Times. To be completely honest, all of this muddies my perception of the business model of the New York Times, or at least the story we've been following up until now. The history of the Times follows the institution, but these days it seems to be more of a franchise, funded by mobile games, if we're being technical about it. I should say the Times tries to separate news and opinion sections rigorously. News reporters are generally expected to be neutral in their copy and even-handed in coverage. Meanwhile, the opinion section has much more free reign. The writers can take much more clear stances. And I think a lot of people get these two muddied up. The Times editorial board, a separate team, issues editorials that represent an institutional viewpoint. So like I said, the challenge is that in the digital age, readers often don't distinguish between the two. A controversial op-ed could blow back up on the news side's reputation. A key flashpoint was in June 2020, when the opinion section published an op-ed by Republican Senator Tom Cotton titled, quote, "Send in the troops." It advocated military force against racial justice protesters in the summer of 2020. The piece, quote, drew widespread criticism, including open rebellion from dozens of Times journalists on social media, who argued it endangered Black reporters and was based on misinformation. Initially, publisher A.G. Sulzberger and opinion editor James Bennett defended publishing it on free speech grounds. They argued, quote, "We need to expose readers to contrary views." But within days, the Times flipped. They admitted the essay didn't meet their standards and shouldn't have run as written. Now, this whole situation was emblematic of deeper internal tensions. Younger staff and many readers felt the Times' commitment to open debate was clashing with its duty to avoid amplifying seemingly harmful ideas. Staffers even framed it as a workplace safety issues by saying that publishing the piece, quote, put Black at New York Times staffers in danger. The episode highlighted a generational ideological divide within the company. One camp emphasizing traditional neutrality and erring on all sides, while another camp prioritized moral clarity and the impact of words. So the Times has had to reckon with questions like, does, quote, both sides' objectivity sometimes lead to false equivalence? You know, at what point does the institution take an explicit stand on something? Now, they're ongoing questions, and the Times approach has been evolving, to say the least. In recent years, the newsroom has gotten somewhat more comfortable calling a lie, like referring to Trump's election falsehoods as lies in print in 2020, which it hesitated to do when he brought those same claims up in 2016. But it still aspires to be a forum for diverse viewpoints, which inevitably brings criticisms from all sides. But I want to bring it back to the personalities we mentioned earlier, because I keep thinking about this. What does the rise in popularity of these journalists mean for the space at large? Is it a good thing for the business model of the Times, or a harbinger of worse things to come? So, recently Conan O'Brien was on Stephen Colbert's late night show, and he said something really interesting. When discussing Colbert's impending cancellation next year, he said the following.
The connection you have with your audience, you're taking with you. No one else owns that. That's yours. That's true.
So what that has me thinking is, like, if any of these journalists working at the Times grow tired with the company, they get to take the massive audiences they've garnered with them wherever they go. It's not a risk born out of nothing, by the way. Just look what happened to BuzzFeed in the 2010s. They used to own the Try Guys. So all this makes me wonder, if these creators were to leave and the Times were to falter because of their exits, is that a bad thing? Are these journalists making better content than they would on their own because of the Times? I can't say for certain because I don't work there yet. I wanted to talk to fellow YouTuber Ryan Getty about this. You'll see why in a second. You guys had this great video that came out the other week where you were drawing your own sort of political characters, political cartoons, off of certain stereotypes sort of in American politics. I loved the video. For
Thank you.
kind of what I'm doing here, there was one specific character by the name of Sam Stack.
That's right.
That is so on the money for the type of journalist that I'm trying to talk about in this video. I was wondering if you could kind of explain Sam Stack.
My proudest works.
This is really up there. I mean, there's some Hall of Famers, and I advise everyone to check out Ryan's videos because he's got a couple on these different characters. But Sam Stack here, he's a young man with glasses and a nice buttoned-up shirt with 3 tabs open on his computer. Yeah, he's hanging back. He's chilling. He's got X up, x.com. It says, please consult the chart on it. And then we got Substack, 10 things wrong with woke, and then a bank account with many dollar signs on it.
He's rolling it.
He's absolutely rolling. So then we have some descriptions for this man down below. It says he's a former New York Times writer, and he clearly needs his editor back.
That's right.
He makes 30 times what he used to. And, quote, sorry, leftists, but I did a survey, and we can't afford to be against the baby-crushing machine.
That's his take. I think what Sam Stack is supposed to be is this sort of kind of journalist you occasionally see online that's they often have a background in prestige journalism, like at some place like the New York Times or someplace like Vox. Maybe they have a background in the old blogosphere days, and they're very data driven, and they're very overrepresented in this faction of the Democratic Party right now that's trying to push the party towards taking a more data-driven approach to policymaking. They think that if we can pick and choose sort of the right selection of policies that are optimally poll tested, that this will bring the Democrats back from the brink of extinction, essentially.
It's kind of like bringing into the 2020s. I feel like this idea from sort of the early 2010s of like charts will save democracy and everything like that. Like what you're saying when Vox sort of comes on the scene for the first time and you have these like really flashy YouTube videos. What's really interesting to me about like the prominence of these guys, these people, is their fan bases. These are they're content creators, right? Like kind of.
Yeah, they are. Especially the ones that have made the transition to Substack and use sort of Twitter as a funnel to their Substack, or use their other social media presences as a funnel to their Substack. They kind of have to be content creators, the ones that go independent, because they depend on people clicking through from their social media presences on to where they do their long form writing, and more people can pay for their long form writing.
And then they're making a bunch of money, obviously, because there's $3 signs on Sam Stack's.
Some of them are. I think it's hard to tell sometimes, but I know I'm certain that Matthew Iglesias and that sort of class of guy is doing better than they used to.
Something that I'm trying to figure out is if it's better than sort of working within sort of these institutions. Like you have these places like the New York Times, like Vox, that are sort of a hub for these kind of journalists, these creators, these writers. Is it better or worse, do you think, when they are out?
Well, I think that there's advantages and drawbacks, right? There's an interesting part of a recent video that I did where I talked about the overrepresentation of extreme views on different forms of media. So on traditional media, you have kind of a flattening of the level of extremeness across the political spectrum. Whenever you have a view expressed, it's more likely than not going to be somewhere between center left and center right. And then you move to cable TV news and you see a more overrepresentation of extreme views. And then you move to social media and you see an even bigger overrepresentation of extreme views. And so I guess, extreme views aren't bad if they're correct, but I worry sometimes that what is being presented as extreme is not actually correct on social media. It's just maximally engagement driving, and that's what's making it popular. It's not actually correct. It's just driving engagement. Of course, whenever you're talking about the traditional media, the New York Times, these gatekeepers, people often talk about these organizations as gatekeepers. I think you do get a higher quality of content. You get, I think, objectively more correct content than you get on social media. But you also can see, the crowding out of more extreme perspectives, right? And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. I'm not really sure. I think my worry is that on social media and on these more sort of democratic forms of media, you're getting more extremism without the commensurate level of evidence to back up that extremism.
Oh, that's interesting. That's super interesting, because I think you would hope that some sort of gatekeeper institution would demand something to be backed up to make those points more. And like, I think that's good. I think that's like something we would want more of. I would love a clearer answer as to like what fixes this. And it's like, in the meantime, sort of institutions, gatekeepers that try and like hold a line on some of it. I don't think it's perfect. I think it has its own drawbacks, but it's sort of like working more than the other things at the moment.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that yet, but like, I think that's something. I think that's somewhere to start.
I think that the gatekeepers that exist right now definitely are doing a better job than the social media algorithms, which aren't really gatekeepers at all. They're more they're amplifiers for whatever they're trying to maximize for, which is usually, you know, time on the platform. I think that the only long-term solution is going to be developing a better culture around these things. I think you see disruption whenever there's a new form of media that hits the space. You know, people talk about the disruption that occurred after the invention of the printing press, after the invention of radio, television, and I think we're going to look back at social media as kind of a similar thing. And I think the thing that's going to help us get through this is developing maybe better social norms. I worry that's not very actionable, but I think it's probably the only thing that's going to work. It's going to be the average person developing better social norms around this sort of thing.
I think you're right. I think you're totally right. And it almost sounds like cringe to say that like people need to like be better. But like,
cringe is sort of what I pedal in, you know?
Yeah.
I pedal in cringe, so that's fine.
Dude, Ryan, I can't thank you enough for doing this. Like, I really do appreciate it. And it's great to have you on. Everybody, I really strongly heed you. If you're liking what I'm putting out and you're liking my stuff, you're going to love what Ryan's doing. And I strongly advise you to go check out his channel. His link will be in the description and probably on the thing. And, you know, we'll figure it out in the edit. But thank you, dude. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So what is the future of the Times? I don't know. Honestly, I don't. There are threats on the horizon from Substack and others, but the Times has something these platforms don't: credibility. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the New York Times is some bastion of independent journalism. As we've gone over, they've got problems just like everybody else. I'm not canceling my subscription, though. When I look at the options we have on the table these days for getting news, the Times, at least to me, can often be the lesser evil. They've also collected a cast of characters that I find really interesting. I can get different things from Ezra Klein and Ross Douthat, and as long as Wordle and connections are available, I'll be there. Until Ground News sponsors the channel someday.